doing? I don't know what he's doing. Anyway.
It's live.
Okay, yeah, I think we are live.
Oh my god, who typed?
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this panel of AAPI Book Month. We are going to be talking about our favorite books. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Oh, there is an echo. Sorry about that. We're going to be talking about our favorite stories and myths and how we use them as inspiration and we imagine them for our own stories. But first, I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves. Axie, why don't you go first?
Okay. Are we going to talk about the myth that the book is based on too, or just introduce?
Let's save that for one of our questions.
Okay. My name is Axie Oh. I'm the author of the YA sci-fi series Rebel Soul and Rogue Heart, as well as the upcoming YA contemporary XOXO out in July. And then the book I'm going to be talking about mostly for this panel is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, which comes out next year, and it's a YA fantasy.
Okay, Akshaya, how about you go?
Hi, I'm Akshaya Raman. I'm the author of The Ivory Key Props, which is my debut YA fantasy. It comes out January 4th, 2022.
Awesome. Okay, June, why don't you go?
Hi, I'm June C.L. Tan. I'm the author of Jade Fire Gold. It's also a YA fantasy, and it's coming out on October 12th in the US and November 4th in the UK, and it's my debut novel.
Yay. Swati, what about you?
Hi everyone, I'm Swati Teerdhala. I'm the author of the Tiger at Midnight trilogy, which is a YA fantasy as well. The first book is The Tiger at Midnight, no surprise there. And then the second book is The Archer at Dawn. And the third book, The Chariot at Dusk, is coming out on June 29th of this year.
Yay! Janella.
Hi, I'm Janella. I'm the author of Where Dreams Descend, which is also a YA fantasy. And this came out last year. And I'm also the author of When Night Breaks, which is the sequel and end of the duology. And it comes out on October 8th. So.
Awesome. And I'm Kat Cho, and I am the author of Wicked Fox and Vicious Spirits, which are kind of over there somewhere. And the upcoming Once Upon a K-Prom, which is out next year with Disney. Okay, so I'm going to just jump right in. Our very first question is for Axie. Introduce more about your book and tell us the myth or inspiration that it is based on.
Yeah, so The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea is based off a Korean folktale called The Tale of Shimchung, or The Blind Man's Daughter. And it's like an old Korean pansori kind of oral myth about a girl named Shimchung who is sacrificed to the sea god in her village for 3 bags of rice in order to feed her father. And then she goes into the sea, and then the Sea King, who's like a dragon, rewards her for her filial piety and brings her back up to the surface in a lotus blossom, and it blooms in the court of the emperor. And he falls in love with her, she falls in love with him, they get married. So it's like a story of an old Korean myth that kind of, the theme was respecting your elders and filial piety, but I changed it in my book. So, but yeah, so I'll talk about that later. But that's
what's the conversion rate for 3 bags of rice these days?
A whole life.
Is it in the book? Should we read the book to find out?
Yeah.
Obviously. Oh my goodness. No, I'm really excited about that book. I love your writing style. I think it's like perfect for like a girl who falls into like the realm of the gods.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to talk about inspirations for your books? I know you guys got them. So.
Sure. So I don't actually have, unlike Axie, I don't have one particular myth or folktale that inspired the Tiger at Midnight trilogy. It's really just a bunch of different tales from Hindu mythology and even just a little bit from ancient Indian history. And there's all these kind of like Easter eggs and little hints I've dropped. But aside from that, there's some big ones I did kind of pull inspiration from. For example, the myth of the river Ganga and how it was a celestial river that came down to the earth, essentially, like really just simplifying the story there. And well, of course, like the Ganga River is the Ganges River, and people still worship the river and all of its properties to this day. So there is a magical river, the Tiger of Midnight. So that's the one aspect. But there's a lot of other little things that I played with that I had a lot of fun doing. But I think we'll get to that later. So I will just stop there.
We're trying not to spoil things.
Yeah, right. I mean, is it hard because you guys some of you are promoting like a book, or I guess it's just Janella and Swati, you're promoting like sequels. So
well, it's hard in that, like, when I usually am like, hi, I'm Janella, blah, 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 blah. Like, my elevator pitch, like, naturally comes. And so I have to, like, stop myself from being like, it's this meets that, blah, blah.
Right.
What is the elevator pitch for Where Dreams Descend? Because that's, like, your inspirations, right? So tell everybody.
Oh, good segue, Kat. Where Dreams Descend is inspired by Phantom of the Opera meets Moulin Rouge. And I mean, I feel like those need no introduction. They're just such popular stories and, you know, musicals. But I guess the long story short for both of them is Phantom of the Opera is about this, you know, young burgeoning opera singer who has been taking lessons from a mysterious teacher, and romance and danger and mysteries ensue as she starts to, you know, rise to the top, and bad things start happening behind the scenes. And then Moulin Rouge is basically based on the movie directed by Baz Luhrmann about the actual Moulin Rouge in Paris, where a courtesan falls in love with a writer and hijinks ensue, and it's beautiful.
Lots of things ensuing. So there's like double ensuing things.
Double ensuing, double everything.
No, I love that. June, I like how you kind of explain what Jay Goldfire is inspired by, because there's one comp that you use that you said you didn't even realize it was until like after.
Yeah, it was kind of like Swati. Like when I wrote Jade Fire Gold, I wasn't taking from a particular myth or legend. It was more like looking at the spread of legends and myths in Chinese culture and the traditions, plus the tropes and elements from wuxia and xianxia movies and stories. And I just like, you know, like pick and choose, like, you know, an appetizer, just picking things and making my own dish, and I hopefully it tastes good. But anyway, so after writing that, so I had some friends read it, and they were like, you know, because of the magic system in the world, I was thinking about like Avatar: The Last Airbender, the Nickelodeon cartoon, not the cursed movie, which we will not talk about. And at that time, strangely, I hadn't watched ATLA. I knew only the movie. That's why in my head, I'm like, oh my God, this is a terrible comp. It is so cursed. But then I watched the cartoon, like the original thing, and I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So, you know, I started thinking like, oh, actually, to get people to understand like the story that I was writing, I could pitch it something like, what if Katara was the dark avatar? You know, she was like the potentially evil avatar, and Zuko was hunting her down. So, I mean, like, some people don't like how the series ended, and they're like Zutara shippers. So I'm telling you, like, perhaps, you know, this is a book you might like. Yeah.
I love that. I love that so much.
Yeah, and if I keep turning around, because my cat keeps meowing, I'm trying to like keep him quiet. Anyway.
We're always down for pet cameos. I feel like Akshaya's cat is going to make an appearance at one point.
Yeah, my cat is like right here, and he keeps eyeing me, so I'm like, he's going to jump on my desk. But okay, so my inspirations are also like it's not really like mythology based. Like the things that I drew from feel a little bit like random. Like my biggest inspiration for my book was actually the originals. But like I have no vampires in my book, but I really, really loved that sort of family drama element where it's like you're saying always and forever, and I'm like really gonna like everything I do is like to protect you, and then you do something horrible. So that was like the sort of big inspiration for my main characters, who are all siblings. And then my other sort of like big inspiration was a lot of movies that I really loved, like growing up, like Indiana Jones and National Treasure, and the Tomb Raider movies and things like that.
Awesome.
All the
love
best
your
movies.
originals so much. So I like was a fan of your book the moment that was an inspiration for it. But you and I talk about the originals all the time, so you know I love that show.
Yeah.
My book is based on a mythology. It's based on the myth of the Gungho, which is the Korean version of the nine-tailed fox, which is a fox that has lived for so long that it's built up enough ki or energy in order to become a beautiful woman, and it uses that form in order to lure in men and devour their livers. And depending on the myth, it's either she devours their livers so she can live forever, or she's just immortal, but she has a taste for human liver. And so in my book, it's definitely like, so she can live forever, because otherwise it would just feel a little bit too Hannibal Lecter, which I was not trying to go for that kind of a tone for it. But I mean, obviously I was really drawn to this myth because it had this like strong female figure, but she's always presented as like super duper evil. And I was like, well, are you sure? Because these myths are always written by men. And so that was kind of like what I wanted to reimagine, which actually brings me into my second question, which is that often when we're influenced by something, whether it's a piece of media, a trope, or even like just a genre convention, it's because we love and revere it. But it can also be from a place of dissatisfaction, such as wanting to make something more inclusive or give a character more agency. So what were some of the elements of the original inspiration you actively kept, subverted, or changed when developing your own interpretation? I feel like a really good person to start with is Janella, because I know you subverted a lot of stuff.
Oh no, I knew you were going to say that. Well, I feel like I need to preface this by saying that I started writing as a fanfic writer. So that was sort of my like baseline of storytelling, which was taking something I loved and basically asking why this, or how about they do that? Or if I just didn't like certain characters, they never existed in that world. Who knew? But for Where Dreams Descend, I feel like there are a lot of things that I love Phantom of the Opera. I love Moulin Rouge, but they're pretty problematic. A lot of stories are, and there are a lot of things that I took issue with. And, very obviously, they're very white, like very white dominated stories. And it's like, what would happen if you had some people of color in the middle there? But I'm trying to, I feel like there are a lot of things in the story that harken back to, Phantom and Moulin Rouge, such as like that narrative of like a girl who is, talented, has some sort of a tutelage under like a more powerful and like talented person trying to make it big. There's also the showgirl element and like the seedy underground element. But some things that I want to change in particular were like, Christine, who is the main character in Phantom of the Opera, is presented as, this very timid and shy girl who just happens to be very talented. And I'm like, no, what if she like actually knew she was talented? What if she owned that? What if she was confident and wanted that stage? Because Christine kind of comes off as a passive character, in my opinion, in Phantom. A lot of things are very passively driven in that story. So I wanted to kind of turn it on its head, have a heroine who knew she was powerful, and wanted to, take the stage for herself. So that's just like one example of like where I sort of deviated from the original narrative. there are so many other ways that I did, but I feel like I would take up this whole panel. So take the microphone away from me, Kat.
Okay, I'll go next because it wasn't. I already said that I kind of wanted to subvert the idea that like the Gumiho is evil merely because she's an immortal fox lady. I mean, she does murder people, but like in YA, murdering is not considered evil. So let's just
Some light murder.
yeah, like in young adult, it's just you just don't be mean to like dogs or pets. That's evil, but like killing people, it's fine. But the other thing actually that I was focusing on more, not just the Gumiho myth, was the fact that like at the end of the day, this is a paranormal romance that I wrote. And like, even though I wasn't allowed to call it that for a very long time, but now I'm like, the book's out. It's a paranormal romance. And I really, really wanted for it to be a paranormal romance where the paranormal creature was the female side of the relationship, at least for Wicked Fox. And B, I really wanted to stress consent. I feel like sometimes when we have an eternal or immortal character, like protecting the mortal character, they often like do what's good for you and they don't ask you what you want. And I'm like, well, that's not fair. Like, you should have agency in your own life. Like, don't climb into my bedroom and watch me while I'm sleeping and then tell me it's to protect me. You know, like, that's just not what I want as a human person. So I just, even though, you know, the male character in Wicked Fox is the weaker human character, he's still male in a very, like, you know, in the society that we exist in now. So it was really important for me to make sure that, like, he was a person who really cared about her agency as a person, and he saw her as a person, even when she didn't see herself that way. And then the second book, Vicious Spirits, is a more like of your like traditional classic paranormal romance, because the paranormal creature in that one is the male part of it. But that one, the way that I kind of put my own spin on it was that I incorporated some of my own LGBT identity into it, which I also don't think is represented enough in paranormal romance. So those were like my two biggest things.
It's actually really funny that you bring up Twilight, Kat, because I'm literally in the same room right now where I like read Twilight for the first time when I was like probably like 13 or 14 or something. And I remember being like very, like as a 13-year-old, being very stressed because there's like a patio right outside my door. So I was like, oh my God, like what if some creepy person could just like be in my room? Like it would be so easy to access. It's like right by the road. It was very stressful for me, like as a teenager.
Oh my God, you mean you weren't dreaming of it happening, actually? Is that like me as a teenager?
Actually, I just thought like that part really stuck with me as like being just very creepy. Like,
Because it is.
It is.
Yeah, definitely.
Teen Akshaya knew what was up. Teen Janella would get murdered.
Oh yeah, no, I would gladly let Edward take me. We should be concerned for her.
Were you like making intense eye contact with any pale person that you saw? Like, hello.
Take me.
Anybody else want to talk about how they?
I'll just like throw in my I took a lot of my inspiration from wuxia novels by Jing Yong or Louis Cha, and they were like these Hong Kong adaptations on the TV and films that I watched when I was a kid. And surprisingly, they had a lot of like strong female characters, even though they kind of followed the hero's journey. So you kind of followed like the dude and, you know, like building his chi and his martial arts and, you know, fighting evil and stuff like that. A lot of the female characters, they weren't necessarily damsels in distress. So I actually wanted to keep that in my wuxia xianxia inspired book, Jade Fire Gold, because, I mean, you know, we should have stronger female characters. And similar with Kat, I wanted to create a story world where it was okay to be queer, even though it's set in a world that was inspired by ancient China. And, you know, queer people lived in ancient China. It's just that, you know, it's kind of erased from history books or like, you know, current memory. But anyway, I wanted to create a world where it was okay to be queer. So there's actually a side couple, two lesbians, sapphic couple, and they're happy. They're like I will spoil this for everybody. They're happy from the beginning of the story to the end of the story. They're gonna be fine. So that's the kind of thing that I wanted to keep. I mean, I wanted to subvert, to have like, happy queer people in this ancient seeming world, that's traditional, but it's not, in that sense. Yeah.
No, totally. I agree with that 1,000%. Like, if people are allowed to suspend disbelief enough to be like, magic happens and dragons can like turn into hot dudes or whatever, they can like believe that queer people can survive a whole book.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's possible.
Speaking of dragons who can turn into hot dudes.
Oh, you have one.
That wasn't planned, I swear.
The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea is like very strongly inspired by how Spirited Away. But like with Spirited Away, because the question was like, what do we find a little bit dissatisfying? Because Spirited Away is a perfect movie, but the characters are 11.
Yeah.
So my editor called my book Spirited Away's like older sibling, because the characters are young adults, so more can go on. So that's kind of like why it's like, has Spirited Away vibes. But I kind of teased this earlier, so I just want to like say how I changed the original folktale, like the folktale, The Tale of Shimchang. My main character actually is not Shimchang. Her name is Mina, and my main character's older brother is in love with Shimchang. So what happens is Mina goes and she's like, oh no, because the day Shimchang's supposed to get sacrificed, the brother goes after, the girl he loves, and my main character is like, oh no, I have to save them both. And so she's the one who ends up going into the spirit realm. So it's like, I changed things because the original folktale, is only like, if you're gonna read it out loud, just 2 pages. So so you got to add more stuff in. And a lot of the characters in the original folktale appear in the story, but they're like side characters, or they're like the sea god appears, Shimchang appears, all that kind of stuff. But the main character and the whole plot is original. So that's kind of how I changed it. And also the original folktale had a lot of like ableism and some misogyny, and that's all gone now. And it's just, I wanted to retell the folktale in a way that for like a modern audience, for the people who are reading it now, they could read it comfortably and feel accepted in this world. So yeah.
That's actually a really good jumping off point, Axie. I felt really similarly. So a lot of my inspiration came from, like I mentioned before, Hindu mythology, but also what I failed to mention before is also a bunch of just TV shows I also used to watch when I was young, of kind of the myths brought to life. So anyone who's Indian has probably seen at least one episode of either the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, like the TV special, where there's like 120 episodes and each one is far too long. But it's amazing as a kid because it's just like so immersive. And I mean, like the action scenes and the sets and everything. And you see all these stories that you grew up hearing brought to life. And so I really wanted to take that, take a lot of those themes, which are still really relevant, at least to me in my experience as an Indian American, and kind of meld them into the fantastical aspects of those stories. But also bring in the Western kind of fantasy tropes that I loved and I always wanted to see. And even with going one step further, kind of tying back to what Axie said, making it more inclusive. I actually think a lot of Hindu mythology and Indian folktales are relatively inclusive, like surprisingly so, but there's always room to do better, right? And so I wanted to bring it into a modern context in a way, while telling my own story. So, like, for example, Kunal, and I realized I failed to pitch the actual, like, what is Tiger at Midnight about? I did not mention that. I like to say it's basically enemies to lovers in a fantastical ancient India. So Kunal is one of the main characters, and he's this extremely noble, dutiful, honorable soldier. And that was kind of the main type, at least in the stories I loved as a kid, the main type of warrior that you'd find. And I wanted to go one step further and ask, being so honorable and dutiful and noble, it can be a lot. Like, what does that mean when you're faced with a challenge, something that makes you kind of question everything? So that was really like a big inspiration point for me. Like, I love those warriors. I loved watching those characters, but they were almost noble to a fault. And I don't think anyone is that anymore. So what does that mean in our world? And of course, enemies to lovers kind of gives away a little bit of the conflict, and what kind of forces him to think about changing or re-examining his priorities and duties, and what that actually means.
For sure. I love the way that you build up the relationship between your two leads, because it's like really intense in the beginning, but also slow burn somehow, which like is really frustrating for me as a reader of romance, because I'm like, why won't you guys just like talk to each other?
Yep. I'm so glad that worked out. That was the goal. The goal is to torture you.
Me specifically.
Yes, you specifically, yeah.
Okay, so I don't really have a specific sort of source material that I really went in and said, okay, I want to like change this. So, but the thing that I did specifically change was something that frustrated me as a kid, which was like the magic system, which is basically like, often you see magic as like just this thing that's like passed down through like certain lineages, and there's a lot of like, oh, you have to be born in this like specific family or like in this specific community. Like there's a lot of that, and it always frustrated me like when I was younger and I would read stories like that and just felt like, well, but what if you just like magic and you just like that's like the thing that you like want in your life? And so like when I wrote this, like that was like the first sort of idea that I had for my book was, okay, I want to make a magic system that like anyone can use if they want to. And of course, like, there's always like sort of that barriers to access, but that comes from different ways. It's not like because you're special or you're born in this specific way or whatever it is. And so that to me was, I guess, the biggest thing that I kind of like went into this book knowing that I wanted to do.
In a lot of ways, it sounds like you were playing with the like chosen one versus unchosen one trope. Like in your world, a person can like choose themselves.
Yeah, well, that's like much more profound than anything I would ever say, but yes.
Feel free to steal it from future. We can chat about how to sound smarter than you really are. It'll be good. You can use it the next time you're in a panel with June, since June always sounds smart. Okay.
She does. June is so smart, and she's also heard me talk about like this specific thing before, so now I can, surprise her with a different pitch.
You can like, guess what? Listen, I got something for you.
No, I was thinking like Akshaya always sounds so poised and smart. Like I did a panel with her, and I'm just like, sit still, look at her, you like her, yeah. Anyway. But
Let's just
I fidget a lot.
For the next 5 minutes. That'll be the next question. It'll be like, name something you love about another panelist. Okay.
Janella's hair. Sorry.
Janella's hair. I feel like we need to come up with a new thing we love about Janella. I think we've like.
You always have the best earrings.
Yeah, I've been like staring at the best jewelry.
Janella's nails.
She does have good jewelry and nails.
They're all physical things.
I do.
we don't talk about Janella's
her personality.
I'm a material girl.
Her heart.
I have no good qualities. Yeah, I have a bad personality, clearly.
Aww. So sad. Okay, let's move on before we make Janella cry.
Yeah.
All right. So we're all diaspora authors. And I know that a lot of us felt a lot of responsibility with how we represented our cultures in our fantasy books. But we also want to have like actual creative freedom, like to make up our own worlds, because we should be allowed to do that too. So how did each of you kind of balance those two things, like the responsibility on one side and then your creative freedom on the other side?
One thing that what took up the most amount of time and stress, like levels of stress for me, was I tried to base a lot of the world. There was inspiration for mythology, but I wanted to base the actual ancient Indian society, at least in some way. I wanted to ground it in history. So I did a lot of research. I've always been a nerd about history in general, and I knew some stuff, but there was just like so much to learn, right? And I dove into that to the point where I spent 30 minutes researching the right kind of tree I wanted in the sea. Because to me, it was just so important to be, I think the word is really just like respectful. And I'm sure like that's something we were all about to say anyways, but I wanted to be respectful and I wanted to do the work, right? Like I knew that I didn't have the expert. I mean, like how many people are experts in ancient Indian history anyways? But even if I wasn't diaspora, there's a level of just research that is kind of expected if you're going to ground your story in something like that. So being diaspora, that was much more important to me because I think there's this idea that we have to uphold kind of a perfect story, right? Like you kind of alluded to that, Kat. And everything has to be perfectly correct. But at the same time, there's no correct, really. I mean, history is one thing, but interpretations of tales, the way that someone told you a folk tale, like your mom may have told you something different than your friend's mom did. And there's just a point where you have to say, I did the work. I tried my best here. I was being extremely respectful. And I'm just gonna, I'm gonna take a step back, and we'll see what happens. And that's where the stress comes in. But yeah, I did the work, and then I was like, you know what? There's only so far anyone can do at this point. I'm just gonna let myself mildly be anxious. But you know what? It worked out.
Yeah, I mean, I actually feel like very similar to that in the sense of like how much research I felt like I had to do to be like accurate in some way, and involved a lot of like me calling my grandma and like asking her these like very specific questions, and the kind of like very similar to you where I was looking up like produce and like certain like time periods that are like native to India and stuff, even though it's like, neither of us wrote like historical books or historical fantasies, like they were pure fantasies, but it's like, it's hard not to feel like that, like you said, that like feeling of being respectful to like your culture. But like, I will say that I also like frequently reminded myself and also had all of you to frequently remind me that this is also like, I'm Indian American and this is still a story by and for people like members of the diaspora. So, and like all my inspirations like weren't even Indian, like I brought like my own culture and my own experiences to it because it felt like disingenuous to not do that. But at the same time, like the things that inspired me were all like Western media. And so it felt a little strange at times, but to be like, okay, well, but I still want to like include like this trope or like this element. And then still like try to like honor the like my heritage in that way as well.
One thing I want to add is, sorry, Kat. I was just going to say one thing what actually I just mentioned made me think of is I realized I had to put some boundaries of things that I wasn't going to touch. That I was like, this is to me sacred. I'm not going to reinterpret it. I'm not going to go there, basically. And that gave me a lot of comfort because there was things that I knew I could research and I could do justice to. And there's things I was like, no, this is not something I'm going to go into right now. Maybe later, not right now. And giving myself those boundaries really helped me and eventually helped me lessen the stress and the anxiety. Especially because in 3 books, there's a lot you can go into depth. And so there was a point where I had to be like, no, like here are my guidelines and boundaries.
Yeah.
I think it's really smart. I was just going to say, like, I think there's a huge difference between, being respectful of our culture, which all of us definitely did, versus like the expectations from the outside for us to be like encyclopedias of our culture, which I do think sometimes is an unfair thing put onto BIPOC authors. It's kind of like when I was like, I wasn't even writing a historical fantasy. I was writing like a modern day contemporary fantasy. And I still felt like there was so much responsibility, even though it was very easy for me to Google things way more than you guys. Like if I wanted to set something here and he traveled over here, I could like Google Maps it and be like, it takes an hour by bus to get there. But one of the ways that I realized like I was allowed to have creative freedom was I heard Zoraida Cordova talking, and she's amazing at building her fantasy worlds, and a lot of it is kind of rooted in her, you know, in her own culture. But she said like people asked her like what were the, you know, were the spells in Labyrinth Lost based on like actual Bruja like stuff, and she was like, no, I made all of that up and I'm allowed to do that. Like it's magic. I'm allowed to make stuff up. And after I heard her say that on the panel, I was like, I'm allowed to make stuff up. This is amazing. And the way that I did that the most in my book was that there's these interstitials like all throughout my book, which are like little.
I love those.
Oh, thank you. They make me really happy. They're like 1 to 2 pages of like myths, and a lot of them are actual myths from Korean culture, but some of them I completely made up, and some of them were based on a real myth and I shifted it. Like there's one that's based on the myth called the Fox Sister, and I shifted it purposefully to be the actual lived history of one of my characters, and it was to explain like why she is the way she is today. It's because like that myth is based on what actually happened to her as a young like gumiho. And I was like, this is like just like when we reimagine like, oh, really in history, King Arthur was actually like this, and people are allowed to do that. So why aren't we allowed to like shift our myths to be like, ooh, this person really like Chim Chung really existed, but she was actually this instead of what you guys think she was. Like we should be allowed to do that as well.
Definitely. I think one thing that diaspora authors and creators have to realize is when you look back at the so-called mythical concept of the motherland, which is kind of like, you know, a myth anyway. If you look at like China or India or like, you know, like local creators and all that kind of stuff, they are taking ancient traditions and ancient cultures and tropes from like thousands of years old or hundreds of years old, and they're like renewing it themselves. Culture is a living thing. And I feel like as diaspora authors, while we should definitely be respectful of, you know, traditions and where we came from, we should also see that, hey, you know, people who are living where our ancestors used to live, they're doing the same thing. They're making things up, not, you know, pulling stuff out from the sky, but they're actually pulling it from tradition, and that is what we're doing. I mean, and the fact is, there's never a truly, truly, truly authentic folktale or myth or legend or culture, because it's ever evolving, you know, like, and as an immigrant, you know, someone who grew up in Asia actually, and then moving to America, the West, and living here for like a decade, you know, I feel like I have the right to pull from everywhere because I have lived everywhere. So, I mean, there will be people who disagree with this, but I think that there is freedom in thinking that, you know, you can definitely make shit up. And if white people can make shit up, I don't see why BIPOC authors can't make shit up. It's as simple as that, you know. Yeah.
Snap.
Snaps for that. You know, for sure, I like literally thought of like half a dozen K-dramas that like do these like little twists on like actual history, where it's just like they're allowed to do that if they want to. Why can't we as well?
Yeah, I had a similar experience with Girl. Maybe it's because I debuted in 2017 with Rebel Soul, and I remember being so paranoid. It's a sci-fi dystopia set in the future with giant robots, but I was like so paranoid about getting the Korean culture correct. And I still think it's important to like fact check. Like with XOXO, you know, I had a Korean copy editor, you know, fact check my language, fact check just things that, because I never lived in Korea like long term, so I just, you know, I do think it's important to do that kind of stuff. But it's interesting because with Girl, the whole reason I wrote it is because I grew up reading fairy tales. Like I love Juliette Marillier, I love Tamara Pierce, I love Robin McKinley's books. Like they're all fairy tales, and I don't know. So when I was writing my book, it wasn't like oh, I have to like retell this Korean folktale accurately. It has to be so perfect. It was more like I want to encapture that feeling that those fairy tales when I was a child gave me, but with my culture.
Yeah.
And and it wasn't about it's not about teaching anyone anything. It's just about that feeling that that I had when I was a kid, but I didn't have any of those books because they weren't any YA retellings of Korean folktales. So for me, it's like I cared so much in 2017, and then 2021, I'm like, whatever.
Listen, it's been so long. Yeah. It's been like 10 years since 2017. Okay, like that was a lifetime ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my god.
Actually, I agree. I think there does come a point where you're kind of like, whatever. Like, you know what? You have, being honest, like you can only carry that much like stress and anxiety, like, and like the burden of like representing your entire culture for so long before you just say, hey, I'm one person, I'm doing my best here, and like, yeah.
I mean, I think that's the hard part, because it's like when there's so few of us still, like that burden feels a lot to be like, well, I want to do it right, whatever that means, because there's no such thing as right, but it's like it feels like you want to try to like appease everyone, and say like, well, I represented this element or this identity like faithfully, when it's like, when you have like 30 people or 50 people, then it's different, because then you get all these different like nuances and different variations. But when there's like only one person doing this, then it's like there's far more of that pressure.
Yeah, because everyone wants that story to be their representation, and they have a right to ask for representation. But I think that there is just like way too much pressure when there's just so few of us. Like you were saying, Akshaya, I think like I remember, a few years ago, there was a book that came out, and it was one of the first ones that was like of that culture by an author of that culture as well, and like being published by like a major Big 5 publisher. And I saw critiques of it because the bad guy happened to be also someone from that culture, but literally every character was. And so they were like, but you shouldn't have us be the bad guy, because we've been the bad guy in so many books. And people were like, okay, you're not wrong, but also like, this is just one book. And like, there's more nuance to that. And this author, his own voices, and they're allowed to do like what they want to do with the story. But that conversation came up. I don't think that conversation ever would have come up if like we had 50 of those books, like you were saying, Akshaya, but because it was the first of its kind, it was a discussion that happened around it.
Yeah, and I think like it's important that yes, we definitely should be respectful when we write about our cultures and stuff like that. And readers have a right, to want more stories that represent them. But it's not on us, it's on publishing as an industry to provide those stories. I mean, so I think like hopefully like trying to think that way will actually free the minds of diaspora and BIPOC authors to actually write the stories that they truly want, and not like burn out because they're trying to like please everybody, and in the end, like they get burned out, Yeah.
For sure.
We can have one, I was about to say, we can have one less phase story. Just saying.
Well, that segues into like what I was gonna say, because well, I feel like I actually have a very different perspective from all.
Oh no,
Janella, you froze. The one moment that Janella
snatched her away.
She froze.
Am I here?
We see she's back.
Do you see me?
Can you talk? Yeah, I can hear you.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, good. Okay. Oh my God, what did you hear me last say?
Just start from the beginning.
Different perspective.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like I have a different perspective from you all, because Where Dreams Descend isn't rooted in Filipino mythology. I'm Filipino American, and there is nothing really, about my heritage explicitly that's on the page. My main character, Kalia, is Filipino coded, so I imagined her looking like, like my sisters, and like someone I could cosplay as, because I never had that growing up. And I think that is something that diaspora authors really have to, struggle with when they're growing up, is not seeing that sort of visibility in different settings. The world of Where Dreams Descend, it's a pretty, I would say it's a pretty Western world, but there are people of color, sort of in the same way. There are people of color everywhere in, Cinderella with Brandy in it, the 1997 version, which is the only Cinderella that exists in my heart. That was one of my big inspirations for Where Dreams Descend, because it's I had never seen, a Filipino-looking girl who was in a ball gown or was a showgirl or did any of this stuff. And I, seeing that, if I was, would have done a lot for me, because seeing someone who looked like me be the confident, the powerful, not just the side character, that would have, just been so inspirational to me. However, I feel like there's another spectrum of, stress and responsibility, because even though I did have a lot of creative freedom in that I was able to create this world and just have a lot of diverse people in it, the fact that I couldn't say it was, formally an own voices story made me feel like, am I only allowed to write stories about Filipino people and Filipino worlds? And it's a burden that is really on a lot of BIPOC authors, is you feel shoehorned and cornered into writing stories about your identity and your pain, when all I wanted to do was write about, joy and diversity, people just existing in romantic fantasy worlds and not really having, that ugliness touch the world, because there's a lot more ugliness in fantasy that doesn't have to be about racism. But I feel like it's interesting, the two ends of that stress and responsibility is wanting to be, respectful and honoring your culture and researching, making sure it's as accurate as you can, and then feeling like you need to write about, your own culture and your identity and your pain to actually be worth something. So that's where I come from, I guess.
I love that, though, because I do think Where Dreams Descend is a beautiful, duology, in that we can see a woman of color be a hero without having to justify her existence in the world, based on race, which I think we need that just as much as we need the stories that dissect our cultures, or dissect how we experience the world as a BIPOC person, being seen through a white lens often. For Once Upon a K-Prom, which is a contemporary book and it's set in this world, and it's a Korean girl living in America, I had this moment where I was like, should I have her experience racism sometimes? Even if it was little microaggressions. And I made this active choice. I was like, but I don't really want to have her deal with that. This is a sweet, cute rom-com. Laura Jean didn't have to really deal with racism in 12 Boys I Loved Before. And she got to have her, leading man, and she got to have her romantic moment. And that's why I loved that book. So, even though I could have written about her dealing with microaggressions, I was like, I don't want to. I want to fall in love.
You don't have to.
I totally get that.
You don't have to.
I want to read more stories like that too.
Yeah.
Right?
Happiness, joy.
Well,
Give me
check out
joy.
Once Upon a K-Prom out in 2022. It looks like it's time for audience questions. So I think that, okay, here's our first one. Question: is there a myth or legend that you'd love to reimagine in your next or future projects?
Should we do a circle?
Sure, let's do a circle. I can go first because I actually do have a myth that I'm playing with now in a secret project. And it's with some Korean gods. It's actually based on the myth where the sun god, Himosu, sees the daughter of the river god, Habek, bathing in the river, and he decides that he wants to steal her and make her his wife. Her name's Yuhua. And so he comes down to earth on his chariot drawn by dragons and steals her to bring her up to the heavens. But before he reaches the heavens, based on the myth, she either jumps out or she falls out and comes back down to earth. And she ends up marrying a human king and giving birth to Jumong, who is like considered the founder of Goguryeo. So it's kind of like a lot of things happening at once, but it's my take on that myth with a little bit of a twist. That's all I can say. It's a secret project. I can't say anymore. What about you, Axie?
Yeah, you're Shan, you're a genius, because this was actually one of our questions that we did. So you're psychic. And my answer was Hades and Persephone, but Korean. Yeah, and it was more like less retelling of the actual myth and more just vibes, like the darkness and light. That's it. It was just more like I wanted to write like a character who's like full of darkness and a character who's like full of light, and then like the dichotomy of that is just so romantic to me and just so visibly arresting. So but that was my answer. I mean, I'm not writing anything like that right now, but I want to.
Good job, Axie.
I also have like a Greek myth that I would love to retell, which is the Apollo and Cassandra one. And I just think there's just something so fascinating about Cassandra and this idea of like being this like really powerful woman who like can see everything in the future, but then there's like that curse where she like nobody believes her. And it's like that, I think there's a lot to be like kind of explored there. And like the idea that like the role that Apollo played in that, and the fact that like, you know, he felt entitled to her, and that's why like, you know, she was like left with this curse and everything. I feel like there's a lot to say there. I don't know how or when, but that's something that has been like, you know, I've been thinking about this for like years. But yeah, one day.
So there's a legend or like an ancient story that I really want to reimagine, and I might be sort of reimagining, but it's called Liangshan Po Yu Zhuying Tai, and those are actually the names of the protagonists. And the English translation doesn't make sense because it's their names, but we call it like butterfly lovers. So it's like star-crossed lovers. And one way to comp it is it's basically the Romeo and Juliet of China. And there's also another myth called the Cowherd and the Weaving Maiden, which is kind of similar to like what Kat was talking about in her secret project, and but reversed. But it's also about star-crossed lovers, and I guess that's kind of like what I'm trying to explore in my current project, which is not so secret yet. But anyway, yeah, and also the legend, well, not the legend, the belief that there are 10 courts of hell in Chinese hell. And that's something that I'm actively writing about because I'm kind of obsessed with this amusement park that is no longer running in Singapore. And basically you can take rides to different courts of hell and you see like people getting tortured, not real people, but like, you know, sculptures and stuff like that. It's really morbid, it's really gross, it's really strange. It's like stuff like, oh, you know, if you lie to your mom when you die and go to hell, you know, you're gonna get like burned in the fire and then your liver will get chopped up, you know, like it's like gross. Sorry everyone. But yeah, so that's kind of what I'm obsessed about and what I'm trying to write. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot. I have one specific. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the Mahabharata is like this huge epic, and there are so many little myths within it and tales. And I've always loved that it's just sprawling. It's, you know, essentially about family. It's a conflict between humans, but it's going to be future because there's just, I'm trying to figure out an aspect of it I want to kind of own and retell and imagine. There have been so many wonderful, like incredibly wonderful retellings or interpretations of the Mahabharata before, not just like film or whatever, but in literature as well. Like I have so many great books I could call out right now. But I would love to one day figure out what about it I want to kind of make my own. I'm not there yet, but it is a long-term goal. I've always been in love with the epic and all the characters or specific stories within them, and then so I don't know quite yet, but that's where I'm leaning to, and one day I'll get there.
Cool.
I feel like my book 2, When Night Breaks, is actually based on a myth that, like, I've always loved Greek mythology ever since I was very little. And one of my favorites was the Orpheus and Eurydice myth. And my book 2, When Night Breaks, is actually Phantom of the Opera meets Moulin Rouge meets Hades Town, which is a musical based on the Orpheus and Eurydice myth. So I feel like I kind of just, manifested my dreams into that sequel. But another thing that's not necessarily a myth or a legend that is a project that's been brewing in the back of my mind is I'm reimagining the concept of reality television.
Ooh.
I love this. I'm going to ask you so many more questions about it.
Yeah, me too.
Oh my goodness. Okay, do we have any other questions? Ooh, as Axie mentioned, the original folktale was 2 pages, but when expanding or adding for a retelling, how do you decide or formulate what you're adding while keeping the original tale intact?
Well, it's interesting because I wanted, because the folktale, the Tale of Shimchang, isn't a popularly known folktale, but I wanted people to know it in the story because in the story it's a retelling, so you wouldn't know the tale just from reading the book, right? So actually, my main character Mina tells the whole tale in the book, 2 pages. She actually tells 3 folktales in the book, but so she tells the original folktale in the book, so you will know the actual folktale. And I wanted to include that because I wanted to be a nod to the original folktale because most people won't know it, and I wanted people to know it, and also so that you could see all the cool things I did.
I was like, wow, it's so
Wow. In the book,
I like how your answer is like, buy the book, and then we'll see.
and then you'll see how I did it.
If you want the answer to this, then buy the book.
Yeah. But yeah, like in the folktale, there's like the lotus flowers are like really symbolic. The sea god's a cool character. Yeah, they all appear in the story, but just different. Just my interpretation.
I feel like one of the things that I came across when doing like a reimagining of a myth that isn't well known in the West was that I was like, any Easter egg or anything I included, I was like, 6 people will understand what this means. And I had to be okay with that. But my cheat at the end of the day was those interstitials that I was talking about before, because I was like, I'm going to tell you guys how clever I am. Just like Axie was like, you'll see how smart I am because I included this thing from the actual tale. But I think like for the Gumiho myth, I had so much more material too, because like Shimchang is like one story, right? Like it's like the 1 2-page long story, but like the Gumiho shows up in a lot of different stories. So I just like went ham and I was like, where are there foxes in Korean mythology? And I just like I have a whole Google document where I have every single Gumiho or fox spirit myth that I thought sounded cool. And I decided like what details I wanted to include from each. And the way the details like show up isn't always like, this is true. It's like, sometimes it's jokes that people make, like people like make references to the Gumiho tale. And I know, again, like it's not really going to be well understood by people who don't know the Gumiho stories really well. But for me, it really helped because like at the end of the day, it's still details that fleshes out the story. So as a writer, it really helped me. And it allowed me to kind of root my narrative in these details that kind of made it come alive for me. So that was more important to me, like in terms of like being able to write the story, as opposed to being like, people will know I'm clever, I want that too, though.
You are clever, Kat. You're always clever.
How about you guys?
Ooh.
Well, in Jade Fire Gold, since I wasn't really doing any retelling, but I did there is a legend and a myth that I wrote an original one that I put it in the book, and it actually takes from several different myths. Like there are mentions of the Jade Emperor in heaven, the celestial forges, the peach of immortality that appears in Journey to the West, and Sun Wukong tales and the monkey god tales and so on. So basically, I think like how you weigh it is what fits the story and what you're trying to do with it. I mean, the Ballad of Mulan is really, really short. And look at how many Mulan adaptations we have in the East and the West. So basically it's kind of like taking the essence or the theme and expanding on it. Yeah.
I love that.
I also did something similar thematically. A spoiler, I don't think, but this might be a bit of a spoiler. But there's animal kind of imagery or kind of motifs within the Tiger at Midnight. I'm not going to reveal what. In Hindu mythology and in Indian folktales, these animals are often they're kind of, or they oppose each other in a lot of tales. So I'm going to stop there, but the theme is there. I'm being very, very vague. But the theme is there, this idea of there are little Easter eggs if you pick up on them. And you're like, oh, wait, I remember this tale where this happened. And you can start to piece together just little details that all tie together to kind of have this overarching theme that I'm trying to get at. And I'm very vague. Read it, and hopefully, if not, I don't know. We'll talk more later. Next panel. Yeah, I just kind of echoing what June said. I think it's all in the theme, and you don't have to retell like exactly to the detail, especially when there aren't enough details. It's just about what is the story? Like, what is the story? I mean, like, what's the heart? What's the theme? And what do you say? Like, what message are you saying?
I like doing reimaginings with shorter stories anyway, because like if you're reimagining like a really long narrative, then it's really hard for you to not lean too much on that one. At least for me, like if I was doing a reimagining of like a full length like classic novel, like I think I would want to keep going back and like put more details from the original into my book, and then it would feel a little bit like, not like stealing, but am I allowed to have as much creative freedom as I want? Whereas if you're retelling a short story or like a 2-page myth, then you have to be creative with it, like because you have nothing else to go on. Like some of the best movies, like Shawshank Redemption, was based on a short story, and it's like an amazing movie. Like they made a whole movie out of like a 10-page story. Like, but that's probably because they're allowed to be creative with it.
I was rewatching something recently that was also based on a short story, and I was like, I wish I could remember what it was. I was like, wow, world building, everything deep, even though this girl was like, probably this thing. And that's where the creativity comes in. I think you're totally right.
Yeah, and like anytime for me, like with a retelling, even though I didn't write a retelling, for me, I like to see like, okay, what did the author or the creator like bring to the table there? Like, what is their sort of interpretation of it? Like, where is their like voice, and what did they sort of care about in the story? And I feel like if you're retelling something where there's a lot of details that are already there, then you kind of like lose some of like your own like vision and your own voice like in that space too.
For sure. I mean, I have such respect for people who do like Peter Pan retellings or like, Jane Austen retellings. I have so much respect for them because like I know that I personally would lean so hard on the source material. So it's its own kind of creativity.
Yeah, it's honestly not. So coming from Fan of the Opera and Moulin Rouge, which are like much longer works, and I mostly refer to the musical, even though I have read the book of Phantom of the Opera, and it's wild. And but I found that I didn't exactly lean super hard on trying to like mine information or details. I mostly just like picked the things that I really enjoyed and expanded upon it. Because I think also when you have a story you're getting inspired from and it's almost like it's too in detail, you don't want to corner yourself into the confines of that plot. So if you've read Where Dreams Descend, you can see like the echoes of Phantom, but you can also see where it wildly detracts, where you don't know if it's going to end the same way or if it's going to end differently. And I kind of love that when it comes to reimaginings. I'm thinking of like Wicked, the musical, based on the book Wicked, which like very, very different pieces of work, but the creator of the musical was inspired by Elphaba and Glinda's friendship and wanted to make the musical like that the heart of the musical, even though it wasn't the heart of the book. So it's really about like that seed that you see like potential in and wanting to like grow it into something that, you know, meshes with your vision. I feel like that's always a great way to approach like reimaginings and retellings.
I love that. Yay. Okay. Well, it looks like we are out of time, but thank you everybody who came and spent this hour with us. We had so much fun talking. I'm just gonna have everyone go around and quickly say where people can find you on the internet and just remind everybody about your book titles so they can go buy or pre-order them. So Axie, why don't you go first?
Okay. You can find me at Axie Oh on Instagram, Twitter, axio.com, and my books are XOXO and The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea. Thank you.
What about your books that are already on sale?
Oh, also Rebel Soul and Rogue Heart, right there.
Okay. Akshaya.
Yeah, you can find me on like Twitter and Instagram at AKSH Raman, RAMAN. And my brand new website, akshayaraman.com, which is very beautiful. Shout out to Alex Castellanos for that. And yeah, you can pre-order in some places, not everywhere yet, because it's still, you know, pretty far out. But yeah, all of those details are on the internet.
All right, June.
On the internet.
Yeah, so you can find my website, junecl10.com. And on Twitter and Instagram, I am June Scribbles. So just June Scribbles with an S. And Jade Fire Gold comes out in October 12th. If you like the UK cover, you have to wait until November. But it's worth the wait, I guess. Or you could get both.
Ooh.
Yep.
Swati. Everyone's
Cool.
now seeing like the books I used to prop up your books now.
Oh, you have a great setup. I noticed that.
Thank you.
Like, we got matching books. You can find Swati at on Twitter and now TikTok. I'm exploring TikTok. So, the Tiger Midnight's already out. The first book in the trilogy, and as I mentioned, is the Archer. Hold on, I can aim. And then the third one, The Chariot at Dusk, is coming out at the end of June. So you can pre-order that wherever you want to pre-order your books from. And I will actually be launching a pre-order campaign soon, so keep your eyes peeled.
Yay!
Yay.
Okay. Janella, what about you?
So you can find me at www.JanellaAngeles.com, and my social media handle is at Janella_Angeles. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And I'm the author of Where Dreams Descend, which came out last year, but the paperback comes out in June, and the sequel, When Night Breaks, comes out on October 8th. So that's also available for pre-order. Oh my God, Kat!
And I'm Kat Cho. You can find me at Kat Cho on Twitter, Kat Cho Writes, WRITES, on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and KatChoWrites.com. And I'm the author of, I'm just going to point to them, Wicked Fox and Vicious Spirits, which are out now. And then Once Upon a K-Prom comes out next year. And I think that's it. Thank you, everybody, again. It was great talking to you.
Bye.